Hey, greetings! Welcome back to Sean's Irish Whiskey Shelf. I hope you've had a great week since the last video, and hopefully you had a chance to pour yourself a couple of drops of Irish whiskey here and there. Just a reminder, come find me on Facebook, Sean's Irish Whiskey Shelf. I'd love to chat with you guys. And also don't forget, look up the folks there on Facebook at the Irish Whiskey Fans of America. Great group of people. If you have any sort of a passing interest in Irish whiskey, that's where you're going to want to go as well. So if you're on Facebook, the big blue F, you might want to check out my page, check out the Irish Whiskey Fans of America. So what I have for you today, we're going to talk about single grain Irish whiskeys. Now, we've talked about single malt in the past, and Irish whiskey typically comes, remember, in four different styles. You have your single malt, single grain, single pot still, and your blended. Most people think of blended because you think of Jameson, you think of Tullamore Dew, Bushmills White, Proper Number 12, stuff like that. Those are your blended Irish whiskeys. And you're going to have a little bit of single malt and some single grain and some single pot still all put together. So what we're going to look at today are single grain Irish whiskeys. Now, these aren't quite as common, right? You're going to find a lot of single pot still out there. Redbreast, the Spots, those are two right off the bat that I think of that are single pot still. And they're really some of my favorite whiskeys, to be honest with you. Single malt is another one that has a pretty good following, pretty good selection, but single grain, you're not going to find a lot of strictly single grain Irish whiskeys. In all of the whiskeys I have, and I don't have a really big collection, I have about 65 or so. I'm sure there are folks out there that have more than that. On all of those bottles, what you're looking at on this table right here, those are my single grains. That's it. So, you know, there's not a lot of single grain. You just don't find it a lot. So, what is a single grain Irish whiskey? So, remember, the key word that everyone likes to talk about is single. Remember when we talked about single malt? I made sure that you all understood that single doesn't mean anything except it comes from one distillery. And that's the same with single grain, right? Single grain, you can have more than one type of grain in these whiskeys. In fact, I'm going to show you one where they put right on the label that it's more than one type of grain. But single means it comes from one distillery and one distillery only. So that's where single comes from when you talk about single grain, single malt. Now, the grain part, it can be a mixture of grains, and it can be a malted or unmalted grain. Doesn't matter, right? But you are, and most of the time, let me be clear here, most of the time it's corn. It can be mixed with something else, could have some barley, right? But generally speaking, it's corn, and it's that kind of grain whiskey. Single grain Irish whiskey traditionally comes from a Coffey or a column still, so not your pot stills, but more of those column stills. And you know, we've got one that's named right here for a Coffey still. And usually, not always, there's actually a little bit of discussion about that, but usually when you talk about single grain whiskey, you're talking about something that's been aged for at least 3 years. Now, single grain, it is typically a lighter whiskey, maybe not quite as full-bodied as a single malt. It's usually less expensive for distillers to produce because they're not going to have to go through that malting process like they do with a single malt. And single grain whiskeys usually are used as a blend, a base for a blend, or added to something else to make a blend. So I've got several whiskeys that are single grain and single malt, for example. We're going to look at some of those in a future video. So it's not very often that you find a bottle of just straight single grain Irish whiskey. It's also quicker to make because you're not going through that single malt process. So you don't have to go through the malting of the barley where you let it germinate, and then you got to dry it. Single grain, you're not doing that. So a little bit quicker, a little bit less expensive. And there is some discussion that maybe this, if someone's not really, into Irish whiskey, perhaps this might not be a bad way to start. I personally would say, yeah, maybe. I would tend to push someone towards a Tullamore Dew. Tullamore Dew is my everyday sipper. I keep a great big bottle of Tullamore Dew ready for me to sip. But if someone wants to branch out, get away from the standards, if you will, the Jameson, the Tullamore Dew, hey, maybe single grain is a way to go because it is that little bit of lighter taste, a little bit sweeter taste. So anyway, enough jaw jacking here. Let's taste our 4 drops of whiskey. All right. So first up, we've talked about this one before. This is Hyde number 3, the Aras Cask. Reminder, this was bottled in July of 2016. They even have it numbered here, bottle 4259 to 5000. And this is, let me see here, 92 proof. So it's got a little bit of alcohol in it. Non-chill filtered. So again, just as a reminder, non-chill filtered means they don't run it through one last process where they chill the whiskey to get out the last little bit of impurities. So maybe if you put some ice in your whiskey, you might find little white flecks or something like that in your whiskey. It's nothing to worry about. In fact, some people think that just adds to the body of the whiskey. I've never seen it and it doesn't bother me. So anyway, Hyde number 3. Let's see what we got here in this drop. All right. Yeah, it's a pretty good drop of whiskey. I don't get a lot of sweetness, and I don't get a lot of alcohol burn for it being 92 proof, and it's not very harsh. That's actually, not a bad drop of whiskey. As you recall back in one of our earlier videos, it doesn't really stand up to the Hyde number 6. I believe the Hyde number 6 I liked a little bit better, if I recall correctly. I think I did. I've had too much whiskey since then, right? But this is really a pretty good drop of whiskey. I like that. I could probably drink that. No, probably. I could drink that any day as a daily. All right. Busker. Again, we've talked about Busker. We lined it up with its 3 brothers, the single malt, single pot still, and their blend. So this is Busker Red, the single grain. This comes in at 88.6 proof. So not quite as high test as our Hyde. And let me see here. It does not say on here whether it is chill filtered or not. So I would say it probably is chill filtered because a lot of times they like to put that right on the bottle that it's non-chill filtered. So let's give old Busker a try. A little bit lighter in color than I guess this one here is probably the darkest one. But anyway, let's give it a shot. All right, that is not as good. I don't find that to be as pleasurable as the Hyde number 3. I think its taste is a little more harsh, even though it is not. The alcohol content is not as great as the Aras Cask here, Hyde number 3. Yeah, I don't believe that's going to be quite as good. Probably nothing wrong with it, but I wouldn't. No, I wouldn't stack it up to the Hyde number 3. All right, now Aeneas Coffey, High and Wicked. So this was a surprise to me. I didn't even know that this whiskey was out there, and my local retailer picked up a bottle and hung on to it for me. This is a really cool bottle, not only physically, because you just don't find bottles like this, but it's not made very often, apparently. They put all of the information right here on the front label. You want to know about this whiskey? Just read the bottle. Let's talk about it a little bit. This is 96% corn, French corn, or French maize they call, and, or excuse me, 95%, and 5% malted Irish barley. So we talked at the beginning of this video about how it could be malted or unmalted grains, and it could be corn or something else. This is mostly corn with a little bit of malted barley. But there's not enough of that malted barley to push it out of being a single grain. It's primarily a single grain whiskey. It's 100 proof, so of the 4 here, this guy is going to have the most alcohol. Finished in Madeira casks, Tinta Negra Madeira casks, so it should have some sweetness to it, and it is non-chill filtered. They only made 1,500 9-liter cases of this. So, as I recall, when we first tasted this together, that was a really good drop of whiskey. Let's see if we remember that right. Yeah, we remember that right. So, a little more alcohol burn than this. Obviously, because it's 100 proof, as opposed to 92. But I can taste the sweetness in this. I definitely get the sweet flavor in this that I'm missing, especially in the Busker. I get a little bit in this, but not like the High and Wicked. This, you can definitely taste that Madeira taste, that Madeira, I think it's a wine. I'm not a wine drinker, so if I'm wrong, someone throw a comment at me. But I definitely get that sweetness in this. And boy, I tell you what, that's a really good whiskey right there. I would, yeah, I'd have a drop of that with you guys any day, anytime. That's fantastic. All right, last but not least, Teeling Single Grain. So this is also 92 proof. I've had it long enough that the cork has disintegrated. Don't want it falling off, so we'll just take it off here. Single grain. This was bottled in June of 2018, so it's been around for a little while. Non-chill filtered, so like the other 2 here, non-chill filtered. Teeling's a pretty big name. There's a lot of Teeling whiskey out there. I just haven't picked up a lot of it. Whether it's because I haven't seen it around, it just hasn't tripped my trigger, I don't know. I only have 2 bottles of Teeling whiskey. I've got this and I've got the small batch. I think I had like a 12-year at one point, but the Great Irish Whiskey Disaster of 2021, I lost that bottle, so I'm down to just 2. Yeah, I might have to get some more Teeling, especially if this tastes out pretty good, which, as I recall, the last time I tasted this, it wasn't too shabby. So let's see how we do with it. Not bad. I would put it on par with the Hyde number 3, but I really don't think it's going to knock the High and Wicked out of its top spot. There's no way. I think the High and Wicked of these 4, if you're looking for a single grain whiskey that is going to be fantastic, you want the High and Wicked. Right? Now, High and Wicked isn't super expensive. It's not super cheap. I'm trying to think what I paid for that. I mean, it didn't break the bank. It was under $100. So it's not going to be like a bottle of Jameson. It's not going to be like a bottle of Tullamore Dew. It's going to be a little pricier. But, you know, honestly, folks, if you really want to get the essence of a single grain whiskey, what I believe a single grain whiskey to be, I think your High and Wicked is going to be your best bet if you can find it. Okay, that's the other thing. It's not always easy to find. If you can't find it, look for one of these two. These are a little easier to find and a little bit more reasonably priced. Okay, your Teeling Single Grain, your Hyde No. 3. They're still very good drops of whiskey. The Busker Red, of course, Busker is pretty easy to find, depending on where you live. You know, does your state control your alcohol like where I live? There's no Busker in my state. You want to find Busker, you got to order it online or travel out of state. But Busker is kind of a low entry level. I don't think that Busker is that bad. I just don't think it develops that flavor as much as the other three do. So again, that's my palate. Your palate could vary. You know, you could try all four of these and sit right here with me and we have a discussion about, you know, maybe you think this is better than the High and Wicked. And of course, then I'd tell you, really? What have you been drinking? No, seriously. Everyone's palate's different. Hopefully you're tuning into Sean's Irish Whiskey Shelf so you can learn a little bit and maybe get some of my palate before you go out and, you know, drop some of your hard-earned money on these bottles of whiskey. And you know, by the way, again, if you like this channel, man, please give me a thumbs up. It takes you about a split second, maybe a whole second to go down there and click that button and subscribe too. I'd love to have you as a subscriber. Once a week, I try to push out a video and you don't want to miss the next one, right? So anyway, I think that's all I have for you tonight. I hope you've enjoyed this. Next video, not sure what we're going to do next. It depends on if I get a shipment or not before the next video shoots. I've got 3 bottles that should be coming in. One has actually made it here already. I've got the Quiet Man 8-year, which is a single malt. But I've got 2 others on the way. One is a fairly common one. One is brand new and hasn't been around very long, and I am super excited to try that one. It's a surprise. Not going to tell you just yet till it gets here. May not get here in time. If it doesn't get here before the next video, then we'll talk about single pot still. And that's going to be kind of tough because there's an awful lot of single pot still behind me. So I'm not sure what I'm going to pull off the shelf for that, but we'll figure it out. In the meantime, until we meet again, I hope you all get to enjoy a drop of Irish whiskey or 2, or 3 or 4, whatever floats your boat. Just make sure you do it responsibly because I want you all to be here for the next video. And until we meet again, please be safe, be well, and that's all I have for you now. Take care. Bye now.